Hello, hello, welcome. We have a very special guest with us, Daniel Vitalis, the founder of SurThrival. And today we're going to be talking about one of his most amazing products, which he's got many. Daniel, you're a bit of an innovator and when it comes to natural health. For my observation, anyways, you've never been kind of a me too. There's a lot of companies, a lot of brands out there will just kind of like put something out that everybody else, oh, here's our spin on this, here's our spin on that. And from what I've observed with your work, your career, and through the channel of Thrival, you've always brought unique, very interesting, very potent, effective, and out of the box products to the marketplace. And I think this one that we're going to be chatting about today is no different. Amazing. So you were one of the ones that introduced me to in those early days, chaga, pine pollen, elk antler, these types of things, and colostrum. Your whole lineup is amazing, and you've just added a new one, and it is a wild foraged, a black walnut protein, and it's been winning awards, been getting the recognition it deserves. So, wanted to have you on and tell us a little bit about the backstory of how that came to be.
Yeah, well, first, thanks for that introduction and thanks for having me on today. And hello to everybody who's watching. And I think when you have a different paradigm, you come up with different ideas as a result. So, I think differently than I think a lot of the competitors in the marketplace, and that's because I have this underlying paradigm based on the idea of wildness. And, hence my television show, Wild Fed. We just got into our fifth season where we go out as a culinary adventure, hunting, fishing, foraging. And when you're out in nature like that, you're constantly discovering really interesting organisms that are food and medicine. And, one of those kind of key pieces of the understanding I'm talking about is that what food is and what medicine is organisms. They're other creatures. I mean, we make medicines now synthetically, but about 80% of them are plant derived in some fashion. In other words, and I mean, when we talk about like where we make chemicals, we call it a chemical plant, right? It's like we get our chemicals from plants originally. That's where we at least get the design or the idea. And so nature, I think, contains the novel molecules of interest. And we have a reciprocal relationship with a lot of these organisms because we've worked with them for a long time. So black walnut that you mentioned, there's my bag, which is now empty because I made my last smoothie with it this morning. I got to run down to my mailbox and pick up another bag. But what that's about is that in North America, we have a native walnut tree. And most folks are familiar with walnuts, like you get at Christmas time and they're still in the shell, and you crack that thing open with your teeth if you want, because it's easy to break open because it's domesticated nut. The wild walnut wouldn't have been that way. You would have needed a hammer to get into that thing. But through breeding, we selectively breed in the same way that we breed lettuces to not have bitterness, or we breed apples to be bigger and sweeter. We breed nuts to have softer, easier shells to manage and have more meat inside of them. Well, the walnut that most of us are familiar with is not only domesticated, but it's the English walnut. So it's been brought to North America where we've cleared land to plant it and create orchards. But we have an endemic species, in other words, a species that's native to North America called the black walnut. And that was a really important food crop for Native people and for early Europeans who came here. But the nut itself has a very thick shell. It's got a very low nut meat yield. So if you imagine the English walnut's got about a 50% or higher yield of nut meat, you get about 5 to 7% out of a black walnut. So much lower, and the flavor is much more potent and bitter because it's a wild food. So they've sort of fallen out of favor as the English walnuts become more and more popular, but there's still a community of people working with that nut. And primarily it's used today in things like ice cream, baked goods, things like that. So mostly it's older folks. It's a lot of, to be frank about it, it's a lot of grandmas who remember using this nut when they were younger. They still cook with it, and at Christmas time they'll buy it and they'll do some baked goods with it. Well, black walnut's only being really processed today by one company, and that's called Hammond's. They're out of Stockton, Missouri. They're a three-generation family-owned business, and they're exclusively in the black walnut industry. They're the only player left. And I've teamed up with them on this. And so they have a really cool story. What they do every year is they put out 200 plus of these, what they call hulling stations. And hulling stations are a place where they have a mechanical huller, And people who forage these nuts themselves can come in and sell them by the pound, and they get put through that huller, and then they get paid on the finished weight of the nuts they've sold. So Hammond's uses exclusively wild foraged American black walnuts. And so when I found that out, I just thought like, wow, I got to talk to these people. Well, we ended up collaborating and creating this protein powder out of the nut meats. And why that's exciting to me is, like I mentioned, the black walnut's kind of fallen out of culinary favor as the English walnut and the almond and the cashew and all these other tree nuts have become very popular, because people have gotten used to the idea of snacking on nuts. And black walnuts are better to cook with. So people don't tend to snack on them. But the protein powder format is something modern people are very familiar with. My generation, your generation, we know what to do with a protein powder. So I'm taking these black walnuts and I'm extracting them through the same process that the medical cannabis industry uses, which is CO2 extraction, which is the cleanest, but also the most expensive way to do an extract. So what we're doing is we're taking the CO2, atmospheric CO2, like the gas that's in the air, and compressing it down until it's a liquid. And then that liquid is used as a solvent to draw the fats out of the nut flour. And that fat gets pulled out, and what we're left with is the protein fraction. So we're able to make a really clean, really pure, 100% wild, hand-foraged boutique protein powder out of the black walnut. And because the black walnut is a wild crop, it's a very high protein nut. In fact, it's the highest protein content of any of the commercial nut varieties. So we end up with 17 grams of protein per serving, which is really high for a plant-based protein. So you'll typically see 15 or 16 grams of protein per serving with a plant-based protein. But the other thing that's great about it is it tastes good and it has a great texture. So if you've worked with hemp protein, pea protein, any of those plant-based proteins, you probably know they often don't taste very good, and they can cause some digestive issues, and they have no fiber. That's another issue. But also they can be real chalky. So this is just a good tasting, good mouth feel, no chalkiness, no digestive issues, still high in fiber components left in it. So it's still like a whole food. It's just been defatted. And yeah, we've recently won a couple of awards, which is really exciting, including we just got the NBJ, that's the National Nutritional Business Journals Award for Supply Chain Integrity. And we won the Nexty at the Expo East last year for most planet forward products. So it's a really unique protein powder, nothing like it in the marketplace.
Cool. That's amazing. Yeah. What is your favorite way to use it? You mentioned smoothies. How else do you incorporate it, or what's maybe another like most unique? Has anybody like written to you and says like, Daniel, this is how I'm using your protein?
Well, yeah, because it's a fine flour and if you think about most protein powders, they don't really come across like food. When you taste them, they feel like some kind of isolate.
Right.
And I want to point out too that a lot of protein products are waste product. So the cheese industry has a byproduct, we call it whey, market it to people. It's
Hmm.
protein. The hemp oil industry has a byproduct, that's the hemp protein, right? These are byproducts. We're not doing that. We actually don't yet have a use for the oil that we extract out. We're collecting it and still trying to figure out what we're going to do with it. We are specifically going after the food fraction of this, the protein fraction. So it's not a byproduct or a waste product, and it comes across in your mouth like a food. And because it's a fine flour, you can bake with it. So that's been probably the most unique, exciting thing about it. So for me, yeah, every day it's in my smoothie. Like I said, I mean, I take 30 grams a day, sometimes it's double that. But my wife doesn't really do smoothies as much. So for her, she just puts it into her oatmeal and mixes it in. But from a baking perspective, we'll do cookies or muffins or things like that with it as well. We've got a big gym community that we're connected to. And so when we have like events there, we always bring our protein chocolate chip cookies. And that, so we'll do like a cacao nib, maple sugar that we make here at the house. We'll use our birch syrup and our protein powder. And it's really cool to watch people at the gym go crazy for that because they're like, oh, these are protein fortified cookies. So, it kind of adds a really cool dimension. So if you're somebody who bakes with alternative flours, any kind of flour substitutes like spelt or buckwheat or something like that, then this is a really great flour you can use to cut into baked goods. So sky's the limit on how you use it. Use it like anything powdered in that sense or any flour. But yeah, but it's exciting because you're adding so much protein to what you're eating.
Yeah, totally. I got a neighbor actually who was recently recommended that he consume his body weight in grams of protein. And, I'm not saying that's right or wrong. It's just what someone had recommended. He's like, how am I going to do this? Right. And, for a lot of people, that's where protein powders come in,
I
just
think
to be able
about
to.
0.75 to a gram per pound of body weight. You'll hear, what's the other number you'll hear? Like 1.75 grams per kilo. I'll sometimes hear 1.5 grams of protein per kilo. So this has been interesting to watch over the years. I've been in the nutrition field for about 3 decades. I have seen it all, man. I have seen high protein, low protein, high fat, low fat, high carb, low carb, right? And it's hilarious to watch the rearrangement. I call it the shell game, where it's like we keep rearranging the macronutrients. This is perfect. That's perfect. I had a guy the other day. I had been out foraging for ground nuts, which are like a carbohydrate rich tuber. And a guy writes on my post about it, no amount of sugar is ever beneficial, ever, period. And I just got such a laugh out of it where it's like, okay, okay, sure
Yeah.
thing, but how long have you been doing it? 3 weeks? Like, sure thing. But why I find that funny is like, we just keep seeing different macronutrients either elevated or demonized. So I remember a time where, and maybe you remember this, Malcolm, where they were saying protein would cause cancer, excessive protein caused cancer. That was what I was hearing, or nitrogen damage to the kidneys, etc. I really do believe that carrying lean body mass into late stages of life is really, really important. And because we lose muscle mass as we age, unless it's called sarcopenia, unless we're continuing to build and maintain that muscle mass, it's just going to go down every decade. So you kind of want to go into those later decades carrying some muscle mass. And to do that, you need good protein synthesis. And to do that, you need a hearty amount of protein in your life. So I'm a big believer in that. I think hitting I know people, bodybuilders who are doing 2 grams per pound of body weight a day. That to me feels like we're getting into the excessive zone. 1 gram per pound of body weight a day. Like for me, that's 182 grams of protein. That's a lot for me.
Yeah.
But I always want to lean in that direction. I don't think I'm going to get quite hit that every day, but I do think more protein is better than less protein. And I say that as somebody who's lived on pretty extreme vegan diets in the past. So yeah, I really think that the protein powder is a really essential way to do that. And so, for me, it's just part of my morning because I like to eat my meats at night. So I'll eat a protein rich dinner. But in the first half of the day, protein powder is one of the ways that I'm able to keep my protein levels up. So I think that's really important.
Yeah. Is there anything else that's in the black walnut, particularly the protein powder that surprised you? Any particular like antioxidants or vitamins or minerals that stuck out?
Yeah, we're going to need a little more time for it to fully understand that because it's a new food in the marketplace. So our ability to analyze it has been like, we have limited bandwidth to do that kind of research.
Yeah.
A lot of people know black walnut because of the use as an anthelmintic in herbalism. So for sure, you're familiar with this idea of an anti-worming agent. So you've always seen black walnut as an ingredient in like a lot of detox formulas or antiparasiticals. I do want to point out and this actually leads me to one of the cool stories about black walnut. All of the parts are getting used here. So let me back up and say this. If you're going to harvest hemp or peas, let's say for protein or rice, that's another common protein, you need a lot of land for that.
Hmm.
That's land that would have been habitat for wildlife. I'm not somebody who goes down this climate change road. I just feel like this is some silly stuff. Um, but I'm big on habitat. And I think that's the conversation I almost feel like what ends up happening is we use the climate change conversation to not have to address the habitat issues, the actual land issues that we really have, because we need a place for these wild organisms to live, right? So if we want to plant huge amounts of any annual crop, that means taking land out of habitat and turning it into farmland. So one of the things I love about black walnut is these are wild trees on wild landscapes. So when you give people an economic incentive to keep those nuts or sell those nuts, you're keeping those trees on the landscape that otherwise are going to get cut down and turned into a parking lot or turned into a strip mall or turned into a factory or some other thing. So I really like that idea. You do have other nut crops out there. Again, I mentioned, English walnut, almond. Um, the challenge with orchards is now you're looking at, I've got to maintain that orchard. So not only am I taking wild land out and I'm planting the trees, but now I got to fertilize the trees, use pesticides on the trees, irrigate. That's the big one you're hearing out of California with the almond industry is all the water that it uses.
Yeah.
Black walnut trees are wild, so they are watered by the rain, they are fertilized by the natural cycle of soil. They get no input. And because volunteers forage these nuts to bring them in to sell them, you have no labor issues either. You're not hiring labor, so you don't have any of the kind of labor issues that come up around, the people who work these orchards. So it's a very clean system, and it's 100% USA. So I love that. But getting back to your initial question, it's cool
Well,
because the husks.
I'll add one more thing in there, which is pollination. With a lot of these monocrops, like almonds, blueberries, like it's a major, major problem.
When you're on the highway, at least where I live, I'm sure you see it out there, and you see the trucks going by with all the bees and the big
Yeah.
nets over. And that's why when you have a honey that says like specific crop on it, it's like blueberry honey, orange blossom honey. It's like, well, how do you know that? It's because they're putting all those bees on trucks and driving them to the orange grove. And specifically, those bees are just feeding on that one crop because they got to pollinate it. So again, when you're dealing with a wild food like this, none of those inputs are required. I mean, it's like humans working with nature instead of clearing nature, setting something up that nature doesn't like and is attacking from the fringes. And then you're always having to fight it back with pesticide and fencing and all these kind of things. So, yeah, a much cleaner system. But then we're able to use everything. So this is another really cool part. Husks get sold into the market for making, herbal preparations as an anti-worming agent. Inside the husk is the shell, and like I said, it's quite a substantial shell. You don't crack a black walnut open with your teeth. The black walnut cracks your teeth. So, it's the kind of thing where you need either a really specialized nut cracker that's just for black walnuts, which I have, or a hammer. But you need something substantial to get in there. So those shells get ground down into different grades and they're used for metal polishing. And so or water filtration. So Hammond's has a giant exterior factory. They've got their food factory, but they also process the shells in an outdoor environment, and those get sold into industry for those reasons. In fact, one of the cool claim to fame is that black walnut hull was used to polish the Statue of Liberty, which I think is just a really cool story. Very American story. But and then all the shells are in different, I mean, the nut meats themselves, I'm sorry, are in different grades. And so you've got like the large fancy pieces, that's what's going into ice cream and going into baked goods. But we're able to use the nut meal. So we've got a lot of room to grow this, which is also really exciting to me. So the entire nut is being used, but it's being harvested by volunteer foragers. So foragers are getting paid fair wages. It goes through a 3-generation family-owned company. Then it comes to SurThrival. We're able to get it out to the consumer and get them a high caliber, high grade, clean protein. So it's like beautiful upstream and downstream. And after about, I guess, 16, almost 17 years in the supplement business, I haven't seen a lot of things where the upstream and downstream are really positive like this. So and I've said this to you personally off the record. It's like, for me, this is the most exciting product I've ever been involved in for that reason, because there's just nothing but transparency here. It's just a beautiful story, start to finish. And I think if the supplement industry, because you've been to the big shows, I've seen you at them, it's like, it's not what the customer necessarily imagines is going on. It's an industry, and it's a dirty industry in a lot of ways. And there are great players in it, but not every product you see packaged beautifully has a great upstream and downstream story. So when it does, it gets my attention.
Yeah, no, totally. I mean, it's why I started Lightcellar, right? It's kind of like that next grade above just your average health food store, which has a lot of junk in it. And I just like, no, let's just forget all that and focus on all this good stuff. So, yeah, that's why I was super excited to be able to take this on and offer it up to the community here. So, yeah, I really appreciate all the work that you're doing, bringing all the goodness to the market.
Yeah, well, we appreciate you. And I know it's probably not easy getting black walnut protein powder into Canada. So thank you for doing the work to make that happen. And I really appreciate you being a support to us like that.
Yeah, for sure. Well, it does fall under the the food category versus a supplement. That's
Oh,
getting harder and harder. So, Yeah. Anyways, all right. Well, appreciate your time this morning. Thank you so much for doing what you do and sharing with us this afternoon.
Likewise, Malcolm. Thank you.